So basically, she's describing how she's going to be living for herself and doing what she wants to do instead of having to consider the husband all the time or what his needs or wants are from her. And yet she had loved him sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of this possession of self-assertion, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? Free body and soul free, she kept whispering. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. Louise, open the door. I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door. Go away, I'm not making myself ill. No, she was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. Her fancy was running riot along these days ahead of her, spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. She rose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. Someone was opening the front door with a latchkey. It was Bretley Mallard who entered, so remember that's her husband who she thought was dead. A little travel-stained, composedly carrying his gripsack and umbrella. He had been far from the scene of an accident, and he did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife. When the doctors came, they said she had died of a heart disease, a joy that kills. So, what does that last sentence tell us about Mrs. Mallard? Does anybody know? Anybody have a guess? All right, well, Greg, do you have a guess?
Well, so, I mean, it could be a couple of things, maybe. That last, the joy that kills. I mean, we know she has a heart condition, right? So maybe seeing her husband was such a shock that it killed her.
Yeah, definitely. She could just be surprised, and you can use textual evidence to support that, definitely. I personally think, yeah, she was afflicted with heart trouble, but we also know that all this life was coursing through her and that she felt really good at one point. So I wonder if she was excited, or I mean not excited, but so overwhelmed by this shock of hearing this information that she was excited about, and seeing that her husband was still alive. I think that was, like you said, a shock, but also kind of something that she didn't even want to deal with almost. Like it just killed her. But yeah, I think that it's good that you caught that she had heart trouble, because that was in the first sentence, and that's something that people often forget when they read this story. So anybody have questions before we move on to the next activity? All right, so I would like you to get away to your breakaway groups. So Rachel, you're going to be working on finding inferences in the passage and making just guesses on what the words mean to you, and because a lot of these messages are hidden. And Shelby, I would like you to compare technology that's mentioned in the text to what a modern equivalent would be, and think about how that would change the story. And Greg, I would like you to look at the diction or the author's word choice throughout the story and come up with some examples of how that could enhance it, or anything like that, anything you want to add. So you'll have a few minutes to do this, and then you're going to get together as a group and share your discoveries. And also, if need be, put proper MLA citations. So you'll have a few minutes to work on this activity. All right, now that we have been able to explore some of these ideas with your breakaway groups, we're going to get together in your literature circles And I would like you to each share one of your favorite things that you discovered with your breakaway groups. And I will come around and listen, hear your insights.
Okay, so I'll go first. So I had to choose a passage that describes movement within the character physically or emotionally. So in paragraph 9, it says, "But she felt it creeping out of the sky, reaching toward her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air." And I chose this because it is a change in her state of being, and it's almost a little haunting, so I don't know if it's just Louise, the narrator, or if there's like some other thing going on.
Excellent insight. Yeah. I really like that. So, do you think that there's a correlation between the weather in this story and what she's feeling?
I think so, because it also says, even though she feels alone in her sadness and grief, it says that she's surrounded by these scents and the colors that filled the air and different sounds. So I feel like she's not really alone.
Excellent. Excellent insight and great close reading.
Thank you.
Shelby or Greg, did you have anything to contribute to your own insights with your groups?
Yeah, kind of like movement. I mean, I think she goes through a whole range of moods in this story, which is actually really quite remarkable. So, I mean, I selected basically 4 quotes from the text, kind of like just to isolate them a little bit, that just sort of, I think, speak to this. When she's hearing the story about her husband being, dying, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a quote that early on, I don't have paragraphs in my version. She did not hear the story as many heard, saying, "For paralyzed inability to accept its significance, she wept at once with sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arms." So I found that one really interesting early on. It's almost like she can't quite process this at first, doesn't know how to react, and that kind of just almost kind of opens up, and that phrase, the wild abandonment, that she kind of flings herself to her sister's arms, at least in the beginning. Later on, a few paragraphs later, when she enters her room and she's locked in and she's looking out that window that's really prominent in the story, I picked out another quotation that I think really kind of gets at the kind of utter despair that she seems to kind of go through, like partway through the story, and it reads, "So there she stood facing an open window, in a comfortable armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by the physical exhaustion, haunted her body and seemed to reach her soul." The imagery in this is really quite palpable, I think. I mean, talking about a physical exhaustion that can be felt within her in a profound way, like touching her soul. She's, it's quite the image, but it's also really utterly like just upsetting sense of being, sense of mood. But yet again, there's more movement too that happens. There's kind of another change that happens. So once she kind of processes this and sort of realizes what it means to not have her husband anymore, she begins to kind of to say that this might be freeing. And those are the next 2 ideas I wanted to kind of touch on. That after this movement from despair and this mood, she kind of finds a sense of optimism or even happiness, right? So after kind of processing this, another quote I had much later in the story reads, "Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead, spring days and summer days, all sorts of days that would be her own." I really like that quote because I think it kind of captures her thinking about all these possibilities that lay ahead for her, like after her husband's out of the picture, right? All these days that would be entirely her own, not under the service of her husband, right? That she could make in whatever way she might want. So of course, like her fancy will be running riot, right? It's wonderful. It's a great image too. Just the idea that her mind is kind of dwelling on these possibilities. And then the last quotation I have kind of reinforces that too. So kind of processing this and those new possibilities even more. So much later it's written that there was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. I think there's no better feeling of like being on top of the world than referring to yourself or thinking of yourself in terms of being a god or goddess, especially a victory, this fantastic triumph in her life. So there's quite a bit of fluctuation in terms of mood that happens in the story. And obviously, by the end, you know, her demise is perhaps a product of that joy.
Excellent job with the close reading on the diction of the author, Greg. One thing that you said a lot of things that that I thought was impressive, but one thing that really got me thinking is how you talked about her physical exhaustion as a result of this news. It was not something tangible or something actually physical, but yet it made her physically exhausted to think about. And so I think that's excellent that you pointed that out in that contrast, and that's you definitely explored the text at a very deep level, so excellent job. And Shelby, do you have anything that you found particularly interesting or that you would like to share with your group?
So they have a newspaper office, a railroad, a second telegram, and that she lives for her husband as technology in 1894. And then now they have like the internet and airplanes, buses, cell phones, and she probably doesn't have to live for her husband unless she's like in an abusive relationship. So I said news would travel faster, so she might know ahead of time. His cell phone might have died, so she might have not known if he was okay, and maybe she couldn't contact him and find out if he was okay. But if he was, the only way she would be, like the emotions might change because she might not be devastated that he's alive, just because maybe like unless he's like abusive or something.
Right. I really like how you actually thought about not only how it impacts the story itself, like, you know, the type of news that she would be getting or the type of communication that would be going on between the characters, but actually how her reaction would be different potentially because maybe they lived in a different time, and that relationships weren't necessarily as, I don't want to say like oppressive, but you know what I mean, like she might have like a more independent role and be able to have a job and things such. So excellent job, everyone. Excellent close reading, and I think that you tackled a lot of the major points that I was just going to discuss now. So while we only have a couple minutes left, I'd like to just quickly go over what your homework will be. So I would like you to write a paragraph responding to one of the following prompts. Why did the author choose this title? It's called The Story of an Hour. So I would like you to think about the story itself and why it might be called that, and write a paragraph about that. The other prompt that you could respond to is, how would this story be different if it were the husband who had learned of Louise's death? So Shelby kind of mentioned the idea of how the technology might impact the story, but how would it impact the story if the gender roles were different, or just